All right, in this video, we're going to go through page structure. So I have reset my system and we've got a nice blank slate. So let's go ahead and add a page template, but this time I'm just going to choose an empty template. And it's going to ask me to start by adding a block. Now the block is our top organizational structure in the page designer. So let's add a block, and I'm just going to add an empty block. And you'll see that when I add a block, let's open our navigator to make this clearer and come here to our layers, that we have a bunch of other items that have been added. So we've got our block, which is our top organizational structure. Then we have a container. Within that container, we have a row, and then we have 2 columns. Now I'm going to come back to containers in a little bit, but let's go ahead and make this structure a little bit clearer. So for our block over here, I'm just going to make the size a bit bigger. And let's go ahead and align everything centrally. And I'm just going to give this a background as well. And let's just turn the opacity all the way down. With our container, I'm going to do the same thing. Let's go ahead and make it a bit bigger. So I'm just going to give it about 20, let's say a bit more, let's say 50 pixels of padding. Let's also give it a background. Turn the opacity down. Then I'm going to come here to my row. We also want to give this a little bit of space. Let's just say 20 pixels of padding, and also give it a background. Let's make it a little bit lighter. And then we've got our columns, which is our last organizational structure. And so here I'm also just going to go ahead and give this a background. All right. So you can see visually now our different structural items, our blocks, our containers, our rows, and our columns. Now our blocks contain everything in that item. Our containers can contain multiple things, and that is rows and columns, and then any content that we have within those containers as well. Our rows contain columns, and our columns contain content. So let's just go ahead and add a content module to this row, well, to this column. All right, so we're going to add an image to our column, and there we go. But you can add content modules to any item. So if I come here and let's just add a new block, let's add an empty block, and I come to the block and I right click on that and I hit add, I can go ahead and I can add a row or a container, but I can also just add a heading to my block. And you'll see that that is now, well, within the container, but if I move it to the block section, that heading is now within the block. But you can, of course, add that content module to any of our structural elements. Now, if I come here to my column and I hit add, you'll see that I can't add any structural elements to it, but I can add another container. So if I add a container, containers are quite special, unique items. Let's just go ahead and put that to the right. You'll see that I can then add a row to my container. And in that row, I can then add multiple columns. So now I've created a slightly more sophisticated design, or a more advanced design. And I've now got a container within a column that has a row with 3 more columns. So you'll see over here that that is that specific design element. So you can use containers at any point in your design to create more advanced designs on your page. You can also choose to wrap any element on your page in a container. So if I want this image to be in a container, I can simply right click on that image and I can say wrap. And that is then going to put that in a container. Now that is very useful if I have items that I want to implement into a more advanced design. But there is a video that is dedicated to the use of containers specifically to give you a better idea of how to use their advanced features. Now you'll notice, let's go ahead and clean this up. I'm going to delete this block and I'm going to delete this container here so that we've just got our simple design again. You'll notice that as I click through the different structural elements, that there are different settings for each one of them. So the block has its own specified settings, containers have a list of different settings, rows the same, and columns the same. So let's also delete that container. I think that's going to delete my image as well. It did, but that's fine. So if I come here to my block, you'll see that I have my layout items, and you'll notice that I did already play with that a little bit. So I have my direction of the contents, how I want it to be aligned within this block. So currently it's set to vertical, but I can set it to horizontal as well. So let me show you what that looks like. If I come here to my container and I duplicate it, you'll see that when it is set to horizontal, that those containers are aligned next to each other. If I set to vertical, they are aligned on top of each other. I can also justify my content to the center, to the start of the block. I think this will be easier without the second container. So let's go ahead and delete that. All right, so I can have it set to the start. So you'll see it's moved to the top of the block. I can move it to the center. I can move it to the end. And then again, if I had multiple containers or items in this block, let's just duplicate that again. I could then space it around, which would move it evenly around the block. My block is a bit too small. And then I can put space between, so they would be spaced evenly between the items. And lastly, we could space it evenly. So those are our different spacing items. We can also choose to align our content, whether it is aligned to the center, whether it is aligned to the left, or whether it is aligned to the right. We also have the gap option. So here we can add a gap that is going to add an even space between the different elements in that block. We then also have our spacing items. So we have our margin, which is the space on the outside of our item. And then we have our padding, which is the spacing on the inside of the item. And here you can go ahead and edit these to be unique to each side as well. So you can have a unique margin or padding at the top, bottom, left, and right of your block. Lastly, we have our style settings for our block, and that is just our background. And I've already changed that to a color. And here you can choose whether you want it to be a color. You can choose the opacity of that color. You can also choose if it is a style color or a custom color. We also have our gradient background option here. So we have a linear background or a radial gradient, and you can go ahead and customize this as much as you like. So you can choose how extreme you want your gradient to be. You can also design your colors. So let's say that we want this to be our style colors. So we've got this primary color and our secondary color. Let's go ahead and make it something else. That looks really, really bad. There we go. Okay, that's a bit better. So you can go ahead and create those gradients. You can change the angle of your gradient when it's a linear gradient. You can also add more colors if you want. We can have a radial gradient as well. And this is the same sort of thing. You can change how extreme you would like it to be, and you can add as many colors as you like. So you can have the gradient background as well. Then we have our image background, and here you can go ahead and change the image if you want. So you can click here and you can go ahead and look for something else. Let's make it these flamingos, and you can change the background there. You can change the position of the image, so you can move it to where you would like it to be. Depending on the size of your image is going to also determine how much that image moves. You can also choose the size, whether you want it to be cover, whether you want it to be the auto size, which is generally the actual size of the image. You can choose to contain it, and you can choose a custom size as well. I'm going to leave it as cover. All right, and then you can choose a repeat for your image. You can make it fixed or not. So if it is fixed when you scroll on the page, let's go ahead and add a couple blocks. So just add an empty block. That wasn't the best move, was it? Let's add another block, and let's just add a bigger block. So you'll see that when I scroll, the image stays in place, but the actual content moves over it. Let me go ahead and delete those blocks again. All right, come back to this block and to its settings. And then of course you can choose the overlay. So you can add an overlay, you can change the color of that overlay. So let's make it a bit darker. Let's, change the opacity of that. And there you go, you can change the overlay for that background image as well. And lastly, you can have a video background as well. So you would paste in the YouTube link for that video background, and it will play automatically in the background. You can also add or edit the overlay here as well. Let's leave it as a plain color, and we're good to go. Now, all of these settings that I've just covered for the block apply to all of the settings for the other structural items as well. So these are universal settings. They're not going to change very much depending on the structural or content element. Our containers are also similar. So we've got our layout settings, our size settings, and our space settings and our style settings here. Our style settings are slightly different. We have a border and a shadow, so I can add a border and we can say that it's got round corners of 30, and we can give it a border of 10 pixels. We can change the color of the border and we can change the style as well. And then we can also, of course, give it a shadow, so you can change the radius of this shadow, well, not the radius, but the direction of the shadow, so its positioning. And you can change the blur amount, the spread amount, and of course the color. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. That looks terrible. Lastly, we do have our visibility setting, and that visibility setting is available for our block as well. I just skipped over it. This is going to apply when you don't want this element to show up on any of your other views. So if we come here to our mobile view, for example, and I say I don't want this to be visible on mobile view, I'll say no. It's no longer there. You'll see that that block and all of its elements are then grayed out in my navigator. But when I come back to my desktop view, that block is still there. So those are the visibility settings. All right, our row as well has the same settings. We have the direction of our layout. So if it is vertical if we want our content to be vertical in our row or horizontal, we have our gap setting as well for the content within that row. We also have our spacing, our styles are the same, and our visibility settings. And the same applies for our columns. Now, if I add a content item like an image, you will see that the settings for that content element are a bit different. Now, I am going to walk through designing a web page with you, where I'm going to go through a number of different content elements and the different settings for those. So for now, I'm just going to make you aware that they do each have their own set of settings, but we'll get a little bit more familiar with them in a future video. But now you should have a pretty good grasp on the overall structure when it comes to designing your pages. In the next video, I'm going to go into more detail on using containers and creating advanced designs using those. And then after that, we'll get into designing our pages and the different content elements. I'll see you there.